Hej och välkomna till Investor Update. Idag med gruvbolaget Arctic Minerals som kommer att presentera bolaget och vägen mot koppar, silver och guldproduktion i Norden. Ni som tittar live kan som alltid interagera live med management och det gör ni genom att ställa frågor i chattfältet. Vi kommer att hantera frågorna i slutet av presentationen. Och om du inte har fått svar på din fråga eller vill ställa fler frågor efter presentationen så går det bra att vända sig direkt till bolaget och det gör ni till deras hemsida. Även om Peter George, så australiensare han är, förstår svenska så kommer presentationen nu att fortsätta på engelska. Hello Peter, nice to see you again in snowy and cold Sweden.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carla. Good to see you.
Yeah. A year ago, Arctic was traded at around 340 Swedish krona and today around 940, 930-ish. Walk us through the journey so far and the potential that would be in the asset and in the company, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. We had an interview a month ago, I think, when we released the results of our geophysics campaign, which for Hennesvikens, which was highly successful, and we came up with a target area that's 10 times larger than our current Dingelvik resource of 55 million tonnes at 1% copper. But I think today, I guess we'll go through a bit more of, like you say, what's happened over the year and the journey that we've been on and where we're going as a company. I think it's fair to say that we've had an extremely transformational year as Arctic. As you say, there's been quite the appreciation in the share price. But I think, I started within Arctic or took over as executive director, recently stepped up to being the CEO and managing director, but I started back in October 2024 and that was the time when Arctic purchased my private company called Rare Earth Energy Metals, and then I became one of the larger shareholders in the company itself, and then also stepped onto the board of the company together with Robert Behetz, who's now of course our chairman. But I think if you're interested, if you don't know too much about the company, there's probably not too much point in looking prior to October 2024. We're effectively a brand new company as of that date. So a good place to start, I think, is really talking about the executive summary of the company, and it's the people is always the most important part. Of course, the assets are equally important, but it's the people that drive the company. And I guess I'll point out a couple of individuals here, being Robert Behetz, who's now our non-executive chairman. He was a partner of mine together with Erik Lundstam in the Rare Earth Energy Metals private company, which Arctic bought. And then in more recent times, of course, Robert, as I mentioned, he's now the non-executive chairman, and Erik Lundstam being our deputy CEO and chief geologist. And I guess I talk a little bit about Erik. In my view, he is probably the one of the more important geologists currently working in the Swedish system, and someone that I know and have trusted for 30 years when we were both working within the Boliden system, together with the likes of Mr. Lars-Erik Aro, who sits on our advisory panel. And then, of course, talk a little bit about Robert, also an extremely accomplished geologist in his own right, but has taken companies such as Arctic from very small market capitalizations, around the 200 million SEK through to tens of billions within sort of 3 to 5 year periods. So we have the team there. We've been building that out. We recently had Joachim Lidfeldt, who is well known in finance circles in Sweden, coming on the board, and of course we have Mr. Johan Spets, who will be joining us as incoming CFO in a few months' time. Has an awful lot of experience working both in the Nordic Nasdaq and on the main board as well. So. I guess it's very important that when we talk about where we are, I've talked about the people, but the projects and where we're located. And I guess this title here says it all: a force in Nordic exploration and development. So, we now have projects within Finland, Sweden and Norway. Our main focus is our Swedish projects, being the Hennesvikens project down in Dalsland. Our Norwegian project is also extremely important, but now taken a back seat as we try to resolve some of the things that have slowed that project down over time, but it's still of a major focus for us in the background. But that's that focus on the Nordics as well as the critical metals, being the copper, the silver, the gold and a few other byproducts that we have, including the gallium, germanium, vanadium and some rare earth metals which pop up down in our Hennesvikens project. I guess it's also perhaps, as my background, I'm a mining engineer by profession a long time ago now, but I'm also a mineral economist. So I look at the trends of what happens in the mining market and especially around metals, and I'm a very firm believer now that we have actually reached peak copper and what that means for people who don't necessarily understand the mining market that well. But we're in a scenario where I don't think it's actually possible for the world to mine the amount of copper that is required just to keep society going in the way that we have it today. And then you throw the green industrial revolution on top of that, and I have some major concerns with regards to what's going to happen going into the future, which of course is a very good scenario for a exploration and mining company that is trying to develop copper and of course silver as well, style deposits. And this sort of relates a little bit back to my next slide here, which is 50% of EU copper concentrate is actually sourced from outside of the EU. So if we're talking about the Nordics, obviously sitting, well, except for Norway, sitting within the EU itself. But we have a scenario here where in Sweden we actually import around about 50% of our copper concentrate into the country, with the majority of that coming from about 12,000 kilometres away in South America. And this just demonstrates that there's been 50 years of underinvestment in Europe and the Nordics, and that's resulting in us now having to be reliant upon other countries outside of the EU for our metal supplies. And that's I think everybody would realise that that's quite a dangerous scenario, especially with geopolitics around the world as it is today. So I think our timing with regards to trying to bring copper, silver, gold projects to the market is absolutely perfect. Sorry, I've gone backwards. So on to the next slide there, which is talking about silver. I mean, our Hennesvikens project, which I'll come into again in a minute. So it's 1% copper equivalent, but of that's about 0.8% copper and around about 20 grams per tonne silver. The silver market itself has sort of been a bit of a quiet achiever up until recent times, and I think that when we released our maiden resource last year, the silver price was sitting around $30 US per ounce. I think it hit 120 before coming back down to about 85 to 90 today, which is obviously 3 to 4 times where it was a year ago. So all of a sudden it's adding significant value to our project. But like copper, there's big problems within the silver market itself. There's been 5 years of undersupply, so a deficit in the supply of silver to the market, and the world doesn't have answers with regards to where all of these metals are going to come from. So again, fantastic scenario as far as I'm concerned, but I do worry about where it's all going to come from. So talking a bit more about our projects. So when Arctic purchased rare earth energy metals, like I said, the focus was the Bidjovagge project. Look, a fantastic project in itself, and I think it's got the potential to be probably one of the more important, or the most important, gold copper project in Europe. There's some absolutely phenomenal intersections there, such as 18 metres at 2.2% copper and 34 grams per tonne gold, and 27 metre intercepts as well. And these are world-class intercepts. Sorry, I should say. But park Bidjovagge for now. But I guess I'd like my investors to know that we are working on that very hard behind the scenes, and watch this space. But now Hennesvikens is our flagship project, so that's located down in Dalsland in Sweden. an area, a part of Sweden which, you know, it's very poorly industrialised. It doesn't have an awful lot of people living there. You know, but on top of that, it's from an infrastructure perspective. Just as an example, and I think later on I'll have a slide which talks about that, but you know, we have two 400 kilovolt power lines running over the property, and two major railway lines, and a railway line which gives us 1 hour on fast train down to Gothenburg. You know, and so from an infrastructure perspective, it's perfectly located. But talking about Hennesvikens I guess in a little bit more detail, so when we picked up the project in a private company back in 2023, it had a non-JORC compliant resource of about 10 million tonnes at around about that 1% copper equivalent. So we realised that we were looking at something that had potentially, it was an awful lot larger. So whilst we were going through the process during last year of recapitalising the company, we brought in 40 million SEK. You know, we've completely changed the board, we've completely refreshed the management, but we also decided that we wanted to go back and take a good look at the old data from Hennesvikens. So there was around about 14,000 metres of historical drilling that was done by the state, the Swedish state, going back into the 60s, 70s and 80s. To create that 10 million tonne non-JORC compliant resource. And we handed over, we did a lot of resampling and a lot of reanalysis of the old core, which is located up in Malå in northern Sweden, and handed all the information over to a third-party independent geological resource guys, and they came back in, I think it was March of last year, with a 55.4 million tonnes at 1% copper equivalent, and which was no surprise to me, but I think the market obviously took it very well. And then we decided then that we know that this is going to be an awful lot bigger. You know, we have grab samples at surface of 1.7% copper and 40 grams per tonne silver, nearly 17 kilometres away. We can see this mineralisation outcropping over a large area. We also had 5 other prospects besides the part of the ore body at Dingelvik that we converted over to JORC compliant, that if we put a few more drill holes into, we could make that JORC compliant as well. So we know we have another 25 million tonnes there that we could potentially quite quickly add to the resource. And you know, and I guess on that we submitted a whole bunch of drilling applications or work plans into the mines department or Bergsstaten last year, and we should be able to get up and get drilling quite soon in March. So looking forward to actually getting down on the ground and getting out of the theoretical side and actually getting a bit more of the operational things going. So on top of the resource work and the resource development work that we're doing, we also released our conceptual underground mining study midway through last year, which was really exciting from my point of view as a mining engineer, because it gave me the ability to talk to people, investors and my peers with regards to, well, what could this potentially look like? And we had an independent mining engineering firm have a look at that, and they came back and said, well, there's at least a 10 to 15 year project here at around about 3 to 4 million tonnes per annum at around that 1% copper equivalent, with a large high volume, high speed room and pillar style operation, very similar to what they're doing down in the copper schiffer down in Germany, and down in Poland. So you know, that's I guess the first part of a scoping study or a PEA, which I've spoken about in the past, which we're still working on in the background here, and I guess it'll be interesting to see how quickly we push that along, whether or not we wait for more resources to come in, or we start perhaps giving a little bit more of a better indication as what we think is going on economically, at least with this particular project. But I think from my gut feel and from what I can see and looking at other projects, I'm very excited about what that could potentially look like. And of course we have 2 other projects as well. I'd call those greenfields exploration projects. Kuusi over in Finland, we haven't done an awful lot there. We're doing a few little small things planned into the future, but Swan Lake, sitting up in Nordbotten or in near Boden in northern Sweden, a very exciting greenfields project, sits in between the Aitik and Lava projects, both owned by Boliden. We have some geophysics results that were imminent to be released. Again, it's very exciting, very early days project that could potentially be 1 or 2 drill holes away from a discovery. But you know, we've looked at the detail around that, and we're pretty convinced that we're definitely in porphyry territory there. So watch this space on that particular project. But I guess it's perhaps focusing a little bit more onto Hennes Bay, because I guess that's where 99% of the value in the company is today. So that 55.4 million tonnes at 1% copper, or the 0.8% copper and 20.8 grams per tonne of gold. So that gives us nearly half a million tonne of copper already in the ground, 37 million ounces of silver. All of that's within the inferred category. So we've got also plans for being submitted into Bergsstaten, the Mines Department, very soon to look to bringing that from inferred up into indicated and into measured. And again, sorry, and I keep talking about the JORC code, but maybe, you know, that's where I come from. That's quite a common understood code, but that's effectively a third-party independent group that basically says, look, takes our information and signs off on it and says, yes, this is what we have. So this is not necessarily my opinion as to what we have. This is a third-party independent view. But I guess talking about you know, Hennes Bay and the current resource of the 55.4 million tonnes, it is a sediment-hosted stratiform copper silver deposit, and these are by definition large, or very, very large. And if you have a look at the copper schiffer style, we're talking billions of tonnes of ore. So we've got 55 million tonnes at the moment. We know that this thing is an awful lot bigger than what we've demonstrated so far. So I don't want people to walk away going underwhelmed by 55 million tonnes, which, to be fair, is actually extremely good by itself, but it is going to grow. It is going to be bigger. And you know, we've of our 402, or it might be 414 square kilometres of tenement project package that we have, we've really only scratched the surface of that, and you know, less than 5% has actually been drill tested. So I guess that's probably a good segue into my next slide, which is what we've also been doing since we released the first resource, and then we've done the underground conceptual study. We then sat down and, you know, internally and had a good look at what technologies there were around the world for, well, how do we set ourselves up for success on our drilling campaigns. So we did a lot of research into different techniques, but we came across the MMT, airborne magnetotelluric geophysics survey technique, which has come out of Canada. Basically, it's for the layman, it's to describe it, we fly over the top with a passive sensor below a helicopter, and it's measuring the resistivity and conductivity in the ground based upon, well, effectively lightning strikes within the area. So it's very it's amazing technology. But what it did for us is that we could see a very strong correlation between the anomalies and that were popping up within that survey, our existing resource at Dingelvik, and also our prospects. So in other words, so we could confirm what the geophysics was looking like with the drilling, and a very strong correlation between, if we get a stronger anomaly reading, that's also synonymous with high grades. So it's a game changer as far as we're concerned for the project, and makes it an awful lot easier for us, but for our drill planning. But what it did come out with is that we've only done 134 square kilometres of the 414 square kilometre property. But just with that survey, we increased our target area by 10 times. So, you know, an exciting, I guess, revelation for everybody to understand. Look, don't just believe me standing up here saying that this thing is going to be bigger. You know, we're using the technology to prove it. Obviously, we need to get in and drill these things, and hopefully that drilling campaign will be starting very soon. and really looking forward to that. Already spoken about the conceptual study, so perhaps I'll just move on from that one. And the major infrastructure, again, already spoken about that, but I can't stress enough about how important that infrastructure is. And when I talk to some of my Australian friends in the mining industry about the fact that I've got 2 400 kilovolt power lines running over my property, that I have 2 railway lines, I have major highways, I have fresh water, I have a highly educated workforce, they don't believe me. So it's, we're quite used to building mines up in the northern part of Western Australia where you have to build a 150 kilometre railway and put in a whole bunch of gensets to create your power at probably about 4 to 5 times the cost for your power. So there's some major advantages to being where we are, but then on top of that I think there's and we haven't really touched so much on that with regards to what's happening within Europe, and really I guess with the EU Critical Metals Act that came out in 2024, and a real focus on trying to bring mining back alive within the European community, and after 50 years of underinvestment. So I think our timing is absolutely perfect, and really looking forward to seeing where this goes. Forward work plan, I've already touched on a lot of these things, but I guess there's the stakeholder engagement, or the license to operate, as we call it sometimes in English. So it's very important that we put a lot of time and effort into educating everybody in government circles, local landowners, the investment public, with regards to what happens here and what it is that we're trying to achieve. We've already started on the environmental, heritage and cultural investigations, so that project has already started, so we'll start to be getting some boots on the ground, trying to determine what the current baseline is for the plants and the animals, and how we could potentially impact them when we eventually come to building a mine over there. The resource expansion I've already touched on. I think in my mind I want to get this up to a 200 to 300 million tonne deposit. That would take us up into world class, and the sort of size that all the big boys are really interested in. So it's an important target to have. We're already, like I said, the 4,000 metres is going to be starting imminently. We've got more plans coming through, so we hope to be able to expand that quite quickly. We've got the further geophysical work that we're wanting to do, so we're going to get the guys back from Canada to fly some more of the MMT surveys later in the year, and we'll expand on that 134 square kilometres of area that we've tested already. So, and I'm fully expecting that that 10 times target that we already have now is going to grow significantly from there, because we can see the copper at surface. So, and then on the project development side, we're progressing with our PEA. I'm sort of loath to put a date as to when I'm going to put that out there, but I think it's fair to say that with the metal prices and where they're heading, and where I think they're going to continue to head, the numbers that I've got internally look fantastic. So I can't sort of say anything about that until I produce a scoping study or a PEA, but watch this space for when we start to deliver information on that. And that includes things like metallurgical testing, but we've also been quite fortunate with a lot of the historical information that's suggesting that the metallurgical recoveries of this particular Hennes Bay are actually extremely good, and something that perhaps I haven't talked about before is with regards to deleterious elements within the ore body, within the ore and the waste coming back very favourable, i.e. there are none, which means it becomes a very in-demand product, I could say, that we create. So I guess then moving on to our portfolio, from the board's perspective, it's very important for us that we are not considered to be a one-trick pony with only one project. We are an exploration and development company. I guess for the uninitiated, it would be expensive for us to be trying to put 3 projects into production all at one time. But we have 3, 4 projects here that are all at sort of different levels of progress. And I think I learned a long time ago, it's not nice to have all of your eggs in one basket. It's nice to be able to have a couple of different projects. Sometimes one project goes a little bit slower, so you can continue on with your other projects, because I think as a exploration development company, you live and die by your ability to provide news to your investors and create interest in your stock. So when we talk about the balanced portfolio there, we already have 2 advanced projects, being Bidjovagge and Hennes Bay, even though Bidjovagge is now taking a back seat. Hennes Bay being our primary focus, but again, we have Swan Lake coming through, and there should be some geophysical information that we can release to the market imminently as well. So lots of news coming out. So again, coming to the last couple of slides, just on the corporate summary. So we have around 47 million shares at the moment. Share price yesterday, or 2 days ago, was 8.15. I think it's up well over 9 today. Market capitalisation sort of varying between 350 and 500 million krona, depending on the day of the week at the moment. We're doing quite well. We've got, with regards to cash, we have about 18 million krona sitting in the bank. We've raised 40 million krona over the last 14 months. And of course, we've got already spoken about the board and management and advisory committee there. But so I'm very happy about where we've got to over the last 12 months, where we've been able to recapitalise the company. We've refocused our efforts onto our main project at Hennes Bay. We're refocused on the copper, the silver, the gold, the critical metals story. And of course the rest of the team coming along, and with the advisory committee that we have there, that I haven't spoken too much about, but these are extremely talented and very experienced individuals in the mining industry themselves. So last slide. Look, why invest in Arctic Minerals? I guess that's the question on everybody's that's listening in. So right commodities, copper. You can't go wrong with copper. It's a very important thing about everything we do. It's in our phones, it's in our cars, it's in our lights, it's in the internet. Without it, we're in trouble. And then of course you throw the silver and the byproducts that we've potentially got within there, and the gold. Then I think this is definitely the focus. And I guess being critical raw materials in more ways than one. They are on the critical metals list within Europe and the US, the two most important markets. The right geology. So we are after, we're after big elephants. We're not after small little projects. We're wanting projects that are going to be multi-generational, that are going to be 20, 30, 40-year projects. So we think we have that on the way at Hennes Bay. Swan Lake is another opportunity there. If we have what we think we have with another big copper silver gold porphyry up there, that's of an Arctic size. We're up into the billions of tons. And then of course the Bidjovagge again. That's only been drilled down to 150 metres. We know that it goes an awful lot deeper than that, and there's just a lot of untapped potential for perhaps one of the more important gold copper projects up in the north. So the right geology, the right people. I've spoken a lot about already today. I won't do it anymore. The right jurisdiction. Look, Sweden, Norway, Finland. These are tier 1 jurisdictions. I'd classify them in the same breath as an Australia or as a Canada. Not anywhere near the size, but this is a very well controlled and well governed industry that we have in these particular areas. I'd much prefer operating in these sorts of jurisdictions, because you have a rule of law, and you operate to that rule of law, and you just know what it is that you need to do. Does it mean that you have to do things to a very high level of compliance? Absolutely it does, but you shouldn't be scared of that, and that's why you have the people in the company that you have, because we've all dealt with all those sorts of things and been doing it for 30 years. the balanced portfolio I've spoken about already, and then also being positioned in for the Nordic markets. Sweden, Norway, Finland. That's our focus. We want to be leading the way in Europe with regards to reinvigorating exploration and the mining industry. And I guess if you have a look at the Nordics and Europe as a whole, where are our next copper, silver projects coming from? And the cupboard is extremely bare. So if you are looking for exposure to those metals, then do yourself a favour and have a close look at what we're doing, because I think we're on the right path, and I still think that we're a multi-bagger opportunity from here, which is, the sort of projects that I look for when I invest my own money.
And this is only the beginning.
And it's only the beginning.
Yeah. We have received a couple of questions here, but we have a comment rather than a question here from a viewer, and I will just read it because I think you're getting some moral support here.
Oh.
As a man living in Dalsland, I sure hope that you can start mining, and I can't wait to start working for you.
Fantastic. Give me his phone number.
Yes. So we'll do that. But I'm coming back here to, you were talking about peak copper and the underinvestments that would go for the world, but particularly for Europe, I take it. We haven't seen too much consolidation in the sector, have we?
It's hard to consolidate something that is not there.
No. So because the genius behind my question, if there is such a thing as a genius behind my question here, but I mean basically it's not really a question about copper. If we look at copper price going up, but it's a question of a huge deficit in new mines.
Yeah.
So so obviously the big boys would be looking at the prospectors and developers. Do you see any discussions in the sector as such?
Yeah, I think you asked me this last time, and I tried to dodge the question.
Yes.
But look, I can't give any details because that's sort of material information. But we will talk. We're quite happy to talk to everybody. And I think Robert and I we talk about this quite a lot, and he's had this attitude in the past. We're quite happy to talk to all of the big guys about what we have. But we have 5 years of massive amount of value that we can add to these projects over the next 5 years, taking Hennes Bay from where it is today to being construction ready. And each time we hit one of these milestones of either it's in a permitting or whether it's a resource classification upgrade or even moving up above 100 million tonnes, and then also scoping studies and feasibility studies. Each time we hit one of these, we're going to get revalued by the market. So, and we have that capability to do all of that, a lot of that work in-house at a very low cost for the company. So, I haven't directly answered your question, but I guess if I was an outside person looking at us, I mean, we're a logical target because there just isn't anybody. No. There's been 50 years of underinvestment in the exploration industry around the world, to be fair, but even more so over here in Europe. I mean, Sweden is trying to lead the way, but to be fair, there's been more focus on in and around existing mines rather than trying to do what we've been doing and grow new projects. So the cupboard is extremely bare.
And it's my understanding that the reports year to date from Hennes Bay, as we have spoken about Hennes Bay, and that's 90% of the share value here. That has greatly surprised the market if we look at the share price performance, and as a layman as myself, has Hennes Bay surprised you in equal measure, or have you been very I mean, how big of a surprise is Hennes Bay to you?
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised, but I guess I have 30 years of experience, so I understand what I'm looking at, and that's the reason why we've gone down that particular path. But then it's incumbent on us to be able to demonstrate to the market what it is that we have. But one of the interesting things with dealing with the investment community, especially over here in Sweden and the Nordics, is that there's been a real focus on, I guess, the tech sector for the last 20 years. So there's not a great deal of knowledge, I suppose, in the investment community about mining. So a lot of what I have to do is educate the investment community on what all of that means, and also go almost back to basics with regards to, well, why has this opportunity come about? You know, why hasn't it been mined previous? Why hasn't a Boliden picked it up, for example? Remember, because these sorts of projects, I could tell you now, if it was in Australia or Canada, it probably would have been half mined by now. But that's a whole new subject in itself. So it's a kind of complicated answer to a simple question. But it didn't surprise me. But you know, I think, like you say, it's how can you go from where we started a year ago to having a 55 million tonne resource as quickly as we did? You know, so it's.
So maybe I can follow up there with a provocative question here. Could we do the same exercise for Swan Lake and Bidjovagge? Sorry, because although we have focused on Hennes Bay, I can't help but feeling when you talk about those other two assets, you're very, very confident.
Yeah.
So it's a provocative question. How much can you answer on that?
No, well,
you're not lying sleepless.
No. Again, it's a bit of an education process for people, and two very different projects, I guess, Bidjovagge and Swan Lake. You know, I'll start with Swan Lake. That's we would call that a greenfields exploration project. So it hasn't even got a drill hole into it yet, but we're doing a lot of the pre-work on it. And what we can see at the surface, or more the geologists can see at the surface, is the rocks and everything is strongly suggesting that we've got another porphyry very close by, which is the same geological description as what you have over at Aitik or at Aitik or at Lava, for example. And then there's also the potential for a very high-grade gold deposit there as well. So what we've just done there is that we've completed all the geophysics works. We're now waiting on the report to come back, and then we'll go out to the market and we'll tell them how that's going. But yeah, potentially, you know, we're one drill hole away from another discovery there, which is going to get the market very excited, I think, if that is the case. Yeah. Bidjovagge is very different because that's a previously operating mine that was operated by Outokumpu back in the 90s. It has problems associated with it, which is more political, I guess, than anything else. But putting that into the backseat of the truck, so to speak, it's a lot. It's far too valuable for me to get rid of it. But now that it's in the backseat, all the focus is off it. Now all the focus is on what we're doing at Hennes Bay. We're working really hard in the background to resolve those political issues because, you know, I think that we released a scoping study on this back in 2021, and I think it had 150 million euro NPV on it then, and that was at a copper price of $9,500, which is now over $13,000 per tonne, and the gold price was at around about 1,700. I think it's 5,000 now. So you can sort of do the mental gymnastics in your head and realise that that's an awful lot more. It's an awful lot better NPV on it today than what it was back in 2021. So we've definitely got the eye on the prize of the other ones as well, and that's the benefit of having a well-balanced portfolio. So if something's going a little bit slow in one area, you know, we can keep working on other areas and push all these things along and create significant value for shareholders. But as you say, though, I'd say 99% of the value in the company at the moment is in Hennes Bay.
And I think that's the key point here would be really that although you have a balanced portfolio, the share price isn't balanced because it's very much focused on Hennes Bay.
No, correct. And that takes a lot of education because people investors don't really understand all of that.
Talking about education, Aktiespararnas recently issued an initiation of Arctic, and I believe one can find that research on your webpage.
Yes.
Yeah. And on an educational basis here, though, as you are a developer and prospector and doesn't really produce yet, what kind of metrics do you think that anyone interested in trying to learn about the company should look and well, when they look at the research and when they look at the press releases and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult to value an exploration company like Arctic. I do appreciate that because there's not an NPV or an IRR calculation out there where you can go, okay, well, I can see how much money these guys are going to make. It's too early for us. You won't see those sorts of information being produced by us until we put out a scoping study or a preliminary economic analysis. which may not be that far away, but I'll leave that hanging. But, you know, I guess, sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of metrics would you like us to see?
Sorry, yeah. So if you go back to the Aktiespararnas analysis, if you get if you don't die of boredom in the first half of it, because it's talking about the board and the management and the projects, he actually starts talking quite a bit about how to value Hannes Bay and compare Hannes Bay or the company itself to other projects in the same space across the world. So I'd encourage people to go in there and have a good read of that and learn, because it's sort of a halfway step between actually being able to produce an economic study. This puts a value on I guess the EV for resource size calculation, and you can rank where we are, but you can also see the potential for where we are now compared to where we should be within a 5-year period. And you know, what I'm trying to educate the investment community is that if you invest today, you don't necessarily need to stick with me all the way through to when we're producing. You know, that every time we hit a milestone, you know, whether it's a resource upgrade or we release a study or we have a new discovery, each time we do that, the market revalues what we are. So and I think that's a really exciting part of, you know, you don't have to stick around for the whole thing. Of course, I'd love everybody to stick in, but if you want to take some profits and then come back in again later, and when you realise that you know, we're on the way up and we have an awful lot of market capitalisation to go.
Excellent, thank you for that. And conscious of time, I guess that this year will be as let's say productive from your side as last year was. And what would be the next news flow from you?
Yeah. No, I think, I guess just to reiterate, you know, we had a year of consolidating the company. You know, we raised 40 million krona, of which we still have a little less than half of that in the kitty. Our focus was to rebuild the board, rebuild the management team, rebuild the bank balance. We wanted to take all of the historical data, put it into a modern format, and then start our plans for what we're going to do next. So obviously we did the geophysical work, which sort of blew everybody's ears back a little bit to show the potential size. But the next thing is, you know, we're going to be getting boots on the ground very, very soon to start our drilling campaigns, to grow that resource as quickly as we possibly can. So there'll be, you know, watch this space for resource growth from our point of view. But then there's also the technical side of things as we progress towards getting scoping studies, PEAs, pre-feasibilities, feasibility studies, but then that also rolls into the permitting aspects of the company. And you know, we need to get a completed scoping study or pre-feasibility study so that we can then make our applications for our mining permits, as an example. So an awful lot of work to come, and it's, from my point of view, I mean, I guess, Carla, if you think that we were putting out lots of information last year, so we'll just hold on to your hat and see what we start putting out this year.
Yeah, interesting, and we should be interesting if the share price performance can match that.
Let's hope so.
Yes, let's hope so. Well, thank you so much. Educational and interesting. So best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Och vi tackar alla er som har tittat och ställt frågor. Tack ska ni ha.